It's so long ago since we talked, but I remember that you are tremendously qualified in so many things. So before I'm pretty kind of go off the cuff and talk about
Sure,
whatever kind of
sure,
person.
sure.
Is there anything in particular you'd like to share? Like you'd like to talk about?
Um, you know, I've been thinking a lot about family law especially since COVID and how COVID really affected all of us, and it certainly affected um, families and people going through either a difficult time in their marriage or actually may have been separated recently. Maybe they're still in the house together, and then COVID hits. And it was an unbelievably busy time for family lawyers. And it sort of brought out the worst in people, COVID. Sometimes it brought out the best in people, depending on what the issue was. And I actually think that people work together in that crisis a lot better than, particularly at the beginning, than I would have expected, because they had no choice. It was sort of this emergency that happened. But as it dragged on, I think people really behaved poorly. I
Yeah.
think they their issues and disputes were magnified, and the lawyers were worn out, the judges were worn out. So, the more and more I've been looking at this and thinking about it, having done it for almost 4 decades and dealing with people in this space, that there's got to be a better way. I know I sound like someone on Shark's Den or something, but there really does need and I don't know what that is necessarily, but it really has, it's changed over time. I think the disputes that people have over legal issues in the middle of their matrimonial case can take on a life of its own and cost people sometimes everything they have,
Yeah.
everything they have. And so both sides are starting at zero. Some people don't care, because they're so angry at the other side that they will care at the end of the day when they realize they have nothing.
Yeah.
But,
The
people
moments.
in the moment are taking positions out of anger, revenge, sadness, whatever array of emotions they have, and directing it to the dispute that they're having, whether it's their kids or it's about money. And it's really, really destructive. And I don't think there's any magic. I don't think collaborative law is the answer. I don't, for everybody. I don't think, having some other system necessarily will meet everybody's uh, will answer everybody's problems either. But I think if there's people are mindful about what they're getting into and realistic, and also owning their part in the process. Many people will go into their lawyer's office and sort of go, "Here, you fix it," and aren't uh, aren't participating, either because they're too intimidated. Many in the old days where most lawyers, and in particular family lawyers, were all men. In the late to 1900s, where it was not 19 like 1990 and 1980, almost every family lawyer was an older man. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of women in particular, and some men actually, were just very intimidated by these bright and strong individuals who they were sometimes scared of. And
Yeah.
women in particular were afraid to ask a question. And I would like to be very clear before saying, like, we're a service provider. I
Yeah.
am no different than the person you pay for to come and clean your house, or to change the battery in your car, or to do your accounting. Like, I'm a service provider that
Yeah.
you're paying really, really good money for, but you're the boss. You give me instructions, I give you advice. I may tell you that what you're doing is stupid, or I won't say stupid,
And
but
probably not to use those words.
I don't, and sometimes people do things that are that word and are really not good for them, not good for their kids, not good for the other side, or their spouse, and do really things that are not thought through.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you're not getting along with your lawyer, or you feel that your lawyer isn't paying attention to you or not giving you good you got to go get another opinion.
Yeah.
There certainly is a number of us out there. There's lots and lots of us out there. And, if you're not, like, I don't get along with every professional I hire, and you just change. If I don't
Yeah.
like the decorator, or I don't like the accountant I use, or I don't like the doctor I have, for whatever reason, I'm going to look around and find somebody that meets my needs, and
Absolutely.
not to be embarrassed or self-conscious about that. Like, you're the
Well,
boss.
it's too important of a time in your life. Like the decisions that are being made and the advice that you're getting is hugely important and impactful for years or potentially decades in the rest of your life, financially and with regards to your relationships with your children and everything like that. And I want to continue this conversation. And I love that we've actually just jumped in. So I'm
Yeah,
gonna like we've started. So I just want to take a moment, Cheryl, just to say welcome.
thank
And
you.
and I'm so happy to have you here. And I'm looking forward to diving in deeper to this conversation. So thank you for being here with me today.
And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. And I want to get back into the conversation that you just started. It's funny because the other day I was talking to my husband and I was kind of lamenting about, or complaining, if you will, is probably actually the truer word, about how unkind couples are to each other when they divorce often.
Mhm.
And I find it so incredibly sad that two people who, first of all, were in love enough to get married, to possibly decide then to have children together and did so happily for a while, can turn around and be so cruel to each other, which they really are, both parties. This is not, and I'm not even talking about abusive and these kind of
Mm.
imbalanced situations. I'm just talking about, a couple who, maybe one person has an affair and the other person's hurt, and suddenly names go around and labels of abuse are attached, and that person doesn't deserve time with the children. And this incredibly emotionally charged, and then somewhat justified bad behavior really steps forward. And like I said, I found myself saying to him, like, that's what I want to change. I would like to, if I could even find a handful of people who don't want to go through it like that, and help them switch off that anger button for 2 minutes and make a logical decision that is actually better for themselves, for their ex and their children. Like, how do we do that?
Well, it's how do you turn off emotions? It's actually the underlying emotions that are
Yeah.
going on. And what I find, and this is totally anecdotal, what I find is the more passionate and in love the parties were in their marriage or in their love affair that they had, the more difficult they like that like love and hate are it may not be the same side of the coin. It's the people who just sort of look at each other and say, this isn't working anymore,
Yeah.
we're not happy, the kids are gone, this is not working, and they're both sort of at that same stage of come to the decision around the same time. And the stages of grief, death and dying, and grief, and we use the same type of stages, where first there's denial, and then
Yep. Yep.
anger, and bargaining, and etc., and depression, and then finally acceptance. So if people are sort of at the same place, that they've gone along, they know things aren't great, but they're sort of, they've turned into roommates. Those are the people that it's easy peasy. It's even for their kids,
Yep.
they will work something out. The people who had that love affair, madly in love, the other person was the one for at least the period of time that they were, those are the people who turn that passion into a hate passion. And it's very obvious who those people are. Also, when there's a breach of trust, it, like an affair, even though it has virtually no place in our system for some type of compensation for that, like it's just not relevant in almost any part of our process, because we're in a no-fault divorce system. You're seeing people who are truly terribly hurt and needing time and needing healing, but their spouse may be like in a different place altogether. They're going,
Yeah.
how
Well,
about the money? How about the kids? How about the this? Come to the table. I'm suing you. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And it's very difficult for those people.
Well, I work a lot with, so I work with women, and And I accept that, of course, men who are betrayed feel just as awful. So I don't want to position this as only men cheat. I know that that's not true. But anyway, as someone who works with women, the thing that I see in the women who have been betrayed is there's this sense of, I don't know if entitlement is the right word, but it's almost like they're entitled to some kind of a punishment inflicted on the other person. And there's only two ways that they can go about punishing the other person. That is time with their children, and is legally, financially, right? And it's so destructive to the family unit, to each other, including themselves, and it keeps them in the pain. And this is the thing the legal system, that is not the place to have the battle, and it doesn't change anything. He still cheated. He still is happy with his new partner. Nothing's going to change because you deprive him of his children, but now you're hurting your kids too. And it's trying to get that across to someone who's like, but there's got to be punishment. No, there doesn't have to be. The punishment is that he blew up his family and he hurt his children, but maybe he doesn't get punished. Whether or not he's punished in whatever way is not the thing that will determine if you're going to be happy, this woman's going to be happy going forward. And that's the thing I really try to drive home. It's like your happiness, no matter what happens, you could be hit by a bus tomorrow, you can go punishment received, you are still miserably unhappy because you have not come to terms with what happened.
And that's why it's really, really important. And I ask all of my clients, are you talking to someone like a professional therapist, social worker, whatever, person, to work through some of these emotions, which are really, really, really problematic and actually interfere with my process.
Absolutely.
I can't fix that. I can't fix people's emotions.
And you can't be everything to everyone. Like, it's just not possible. You have one job. And it's interesting. I want to just dig into that a little bit, because as someone who provides that support for these women, or others like me provided for other people, whatever, that this support is available, whether it's through a therapist, a counselor, or a coach like myself, whoever you choose to go to. The pushback I get more than anything is, oh, I can't afford to pay you right now because I have my lawyer to pay. And my argument, I always say it, they just never believe me, but I'd love to hear your response to this. I'll save you money with your lawyer, because you won't go in there crying and spend the first 15 minutes, which will cost you $150, just talking about what your ex did yesterday, or how sad you are, or how angry you are, because we all do that. I did that until I realized how it was affecting my bill.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is too, you'll be able to, like, you've dealt with all your emotions. By the time you walk into your lawyer's office, or respond to the email, or get the text from your ex, you've sorted out the head. You've sorted out things here. If nothing else, you can proceed with more efficiently, more quickly, saves money. You might be digging yourself a hole by saying things you legally can get kind of hurt for, so there's all these things, but they just don't believe me. So I'd love to hear what you have to say. Like, can you tell when you someone come in who's getting help from the outside?
Oh, absolutely. When someone is sort of who is coming in and right at the separation, sometimes I don't see them right away, and it takes some time, that I'm seeing right away. They're often a mess, and they don't know what to do. It's shock, whether it's a woman or a man. And, it's a skill to know how to deal with your lawyer. Like, it's many people think, oh, I'm going in this professional's office and they're going to tell me. But there are things you can do, like, if you can't afford to speak to someone, see if you can get some subsidized therapy. See if you can go call one of the agencies. There's a number of agencies in communities that will assist with people. And your clergy there'll be somebody there who's neutral, whether it's in any religion. They'll have that. Community centers. There are people there that can just hear you out and get that rawness, sort of under control. There'll be situations where it's urgent, like there has been some violence, so we need to deal with that right away because there's danger. But if there's not this fear of someone's security and their well-being, and maybe their spouse is left and then their house with the kids and they're worried about money, we can get to the the issue at hand much better if people have sort of worked through some of their emotions. They're not going to be able to work through what got them to that place and why the marriage ended. They may never know. Sometimes they don't know. And every person who you talk to who's they'd had a reason why they separated would say, every person whose spouse has left them, not every person, but seems to be statistically, their spouse left them for another person, they all say, I wish we just had problems and that person wasn't there. The people who have just separate because they're having problems, I wish there could have been another woman or a man, so I could
Have
direct,
someone to blame.
I have someone to blame.
Yeah,
So the grass is always greener, and whoever it is, time does heal.
yeah,
It really does heal. And using the resources available to you to get yourself in the right place will make you a better client and a better party in the negotiations with your spouse.
100%.
To be clear-headed, and even in terms of how you interact with your lawyer, to be organized. I have
Yeah,
10 questions, write them down. Don't and have one call with your lawyer. Don't have 10. When something
exactly.
jumps in
Oh,
your
I,
head,
I
all of a
say this,
sudden your phone.
I
And
say this to my clients all the time. Write your questions down and don't leave the office or the phone call until all your questions have been answered. You're not bothering them. You've hired them. Like I tell them all these things that you're saying,
right, right,
and
right, exactly. And
and
you're
the
giving
thing
them
is,
good advice.
and that's advice that it literally saves some money. So like to me, it's like you either spend it on your lawyer who can't really help you with the emotional part of it, or you spend it on both of us.
Right,
It's maybe it's a wash, but at least you're getting help, right?
right. And some people actually come in with someone. It's like going to the doctor who's going to give you a diagnosis, and sometimes it's not a great diagnosis. I'm not going to tell people happy things necessarily. Um, it's stressful. They don't absorb all the information. Sometimes having someone there, a trusted friend or a relative who can take notes, who can maybe be that neutral person. Like, you don't want your mother who's going to be going and he's a this or a that. You want someone that's a trusted friend who
Yeah.
you go to, or a trusted relative that you go to for that common sense advice, and not people that are going to be to rev you up. It doesn't help. When I was on the phone just a couple of weeks ago, my client's the husband, but he had his mother, a young guy, and had his mother on the phone. I never liked her from the beginning. Like, so someone, I didn't like her from the day they started going out. Well, how does that help?
That's not helpful. That's just her
It's not
supporting him. Say that to him over dinner later.
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
He didn't have to pay me to hear that.
No.
That was not, it was just not, I get it. Mom is, she's a mama bird. She wants to take care of her little chick and wants to take care of him and make sure that, and it was an ugly, awful case. And the wife was making terrible, untrue allegations. And I didn't blame the mom for being upset. But at the same time, we've got it like the legal system is ill-equipped. I got it for all these emotional issues. It's a blunt instrument.
Yeah.
Judges are not going to, you think you're going to get your day in court. You think that every tiny little issue and every tiny little email and discussion is somehow going to change your case. Judges don't have that kind of time. Judges, mediators, the lawyers, nobody has the time or the inclination to want to read every single text you've had with your
Well, and
spouse.
also the day in court, as much as people think that it's going to change everything and determine everything, it doesn't half the time. Half the time there's more delays. Something wasn't submitted properly, there has to be resubmitted. Um, people don't comply. There's so many parts of the family court system that are very broken. And I
Yeah,
really, I know I'm not the only one. I'm sure, in fact, those of you who work in it, this is not a lawyers are all wrong kind of statement, but it needs to be fixed or changed or overhauled in the way that doesn't drain a family of all their financial
yeah,
resources. It it's somehow, I think we're putting the blame in the wrong places. We blame our exes, we blame our lawyers, but it's not. Lawyers are just there to walk us through the system. It's about the court system, whether it's the backlog or who knows what it is, just antiquated laws. Um, there are so many circumstances now that have changed and that people are more aware of. Things like emotional abuse, for example, not being an accepted cause or thing to bring up into a marital dispute or a divorce, I think that's a wonderful development. But I don't know that any of the judges or even a lot of the family lawyers are equipped to actually manage a situation like that and represent their client well, and that it actually makes much of a difference unless they get in front of a trial judge. I don't know. You tell me, how did this get implemented with the professionals who are supposed to take care of it?
Well, our Divorce Act in Canada, our Divorce Act, which is federal, was recently amended to include the concept of family violence as a criteria for the court to look at, in particular when they're dealing with children. And is there family violence, and how has that affected the children, and etc. And there's a much more of an awareness in lawyers and the court about this type of family violence. In fact, as we speak, the Court of Appeal, like today, is hearing a case about the tort of family violence. A lower court in Ontario, in Canada, found that there was a tort, which is a wrong against a person. It's like negligence. So like when you have a car accident, you sue someone for running into you. Here, you could sue for damages for an amount of money. The lower court judge said, who invented this and developed this tort, that there should be an additional payment when you talk about a sanction for the behavior. This was an additional payment that the husband was ordered to pay the wife to compensate her for everything she'd been through from a violence perspective, whether that's physical. There's always been the tort with the physical violence, but this was more of the violence that she had endured. So that case has now been appealed, and it's being argued today at the Court of Appeal. So it'll be interesting to see what the Court of Appeal says. That it's obviously really important that all lawyers and judges have training in intimate partner violence, and intimate partner imbalances. There's imbalances in every relationship. Like
Yes.
every relationship has imbalances. So to just say, for families or spouses, listen, you have your teacher and student, boss and employee. There's always
Yeah.
imbalances of information, but this is a specific, your trusted partner is abusive to you.
Yeah.
Like it's a
Intimidation, overly controlling and obsessive behaviors, those kinds of things.
all
Cruelty.
those,
Mhm.
all that behavior that comes under the family violence type, and financial abuse, huge,
Yeah.
huge, huge
Yeah,
issue.
it's so
There's,
prevalent. I didn't realize until I got into this industry how
yeah,
prevalent that is. It's yeah, it's significant.
and litigation abuse. So
Yes.
using the court and the systems developed by the court in an abusive way.
Yeah.
So weaponizing things that we thought would be helpful, weaponizing the parent assessment, the parental assessment that assesses, what the situation for the kids should be, the parenting schedule, the financially bringing lots of motions and other proceedings in the court. If one spouse, often the man, has more money and more resources, they may litigate the other one into the ground. Sort of like the big insurance company litigating the little guy into the ground. That happens a lot. There's not a lot of defenses to that. More and more courts will say that the one spouse with the money should provide a payment to the other spouse to pay their legal fees and accounting fees to level the playing field. And we're seeing more of those types of orders being made. But it does get weaponized. And I have found and it's maybe just because I'm getting old and doing this a long time, but I found behaviors have been really worse since COVID. I don't know if it was going on Zoom, even to go to court with sweatpants on, the courts didn't see and the people didn't see, but there was a lowering of the formality about it. And I don't know what the answer is quite yet, but if you think all your answers are going to be obtained by going to a trial and having some stranger, a judge who's never met you and never met your kids, and I'm only going to hear the evidence that has been filtered through lawyers and based on what admissible evidence is. So you may say, I heard that he said this, that, and then he's going to do this. Well, that's all hearsay. It's not coming in.
Yeah,
You're
no,
not allowed to
I
say
got
it.
caught up in that too. Things that I knew, but that I couldn't put in
Right.
because the way that I'd heard it was not acceptable.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you know something and you know it to be true, but in a court of law, you have to jump through all
You
these
have to prove it.
very
Yeah.
formal legalities. And what happens at a trial can be often very different than what you expect, just because how the evidence goes in and what is admissible evidence. And the judges, although they're trained in intimate partner imbalance and abuse and violence, they still have to follow the rules. You know, you're supposed to put in a form on a certain day. Will you get an extension? I mean, it becomes very dry legal matters. And, you know, you're worried about, you know, he's habitually bringing the kids home too late or too early, or he doesn't show up or whatever it is. And the smaller the issues that drive you crazy, if you have a whole bunch of tiny little issues, it'd be very difficult to manage them all in a courtroom. It just, you're not going to get the kind of detail that you can negotiate with the other side and sit down, whether it's in 2 different rooms or it's with a mediator, to go through all the things you need to do so that when a problem comes up in the future, because you're still going to have to, if you have children together, you're going to have to interact with this person
Yeah.
for almost ever.
So, so
But
let me ask you this. For women, and again, I'm talking about women, for women who are in a situation where perhaps there was financial abuse or there's a real unbalance or lack of balance when it comes to income, and you know, there's this intimidation and fear. So as they go into this journey, they know that the resources are they've way more resources on the other side. What would be some advice as she goes into this, knowing she's dealing with an adversarial partner or ex now, someone who has way more resources? You know, how does she approach this part of her journey? Like what are some tips you can give her?
Well, first of all, you want to have your lawyer who is a partner with you in going
Yeah.
through this process, who you need to listen to and who you need to trust. So I often am interviewed, I call it the beauty contest, by people who will get referral, like just don't, you know, just don't pick the person who comes first in the, you know, the Google search, or, you know, that some friend of a friend of
No,
a
sit
friend
down
says.
and talk to them and make sure that you feel
Yes,
that you're being heard by this person, that you can
yes.
trust this person, that they're actually there for you. And that,
And they have a,
I think,
yeah, and they,
also into what you said earlier about intimidation, someone that you feel comfortable with, that you feel that you don't feel intimidated by. If you feel intimidated, you should probably choose someone else.
yes, and that's what I'm trying to say, that, you
Mhm.
know, if you know, if your best friend has been talking about their lawyer and you've been hearing about them, and well, that's then you have already a reference and a referral that makes sense. If it's someone though if it's someone though that really you have no idea, like no idea at all, you know, for example, like who would know, like even I wouldn't know who's a better doctor. I don't know. I'm not in
Yeah.
that world. Um, so I'd have to ask around and look into it and do your research. Find out the person that who has the skill, who you can afford, and who has a strategy for you. So at the first meeting, you want to say, this is my situation. You know, even send a little, like I ask people to fill in a bit of a questionnaire before they come in, so I get some sense. I have 2 kids. I say, well, this is how old they are. This is where they go to school. This is how much I make. This is how much, so that you can say, so in the first meeting, and almost after so many years, I can tell you where the case will, within some parameters, end up at the end of the day, just based on
Yeah.
what the courts are now, what the laws are,
Yeah.
and what they can expect. Sometimes people don't know that information. The client doesn't know that information. We can say, well, you have to collect all your information and do the work and get it done. I do that work for people, but it costs them a lot of money to have
Yes.
to use a professional to go through receipts. And if you have those resources and you can pay someone or you can get your accountant to do it, great. But if you're like most people, you got to get that you know, all
Well,
those.
that was one of the first questions I asked my lawyer, and I think I have it right in my separation checklist that I send out to people, is ask your lawyer which tasks you can do to help save money. And that was exactly it. Was, well, if you can collect the receipts and summarize them and just give us a final tally, that would be incredibly helpful, as long as we know that you have the backup information in case we need it, right? And I was like, I'll do that, because I mean, I can only imagine them having to go through it and phone me and ask me about this and that. And meanwhile, I know what it all is. So I can, like, okay, this is what this costs. This is what we spend on this. This is what the kids need, and just give them the tally. Of course, so, but that's an important question to ask your attorney. Again, it's like,
Absolutely.
how can I help keep the costs down?
And also write the story out. I always, the chronology of the marriage, the roles
Okay.
you both had at the kids, like do the narrative. Not only is it incredibly useful for me, and don't edit, just write, get at the computer, write it. It is cathartic.
Yeah.
It's
We
very
talked about this the
cathartic.
first time we chatted, and I love that you said that. Yes, it's cathartic. First of all, I do a lot of journaling with my clients,
Right.
so I definitely have them write their story. But I would also think, one thing is for them to take the time to cry and write and get all this down. They'll probably edit and cut some things out,
Sure,
whatever.
yeah.
And then you will read it, but you will read it much faster and with more clarity, probably like gaining more clarity about the situation than someone sitting and crying about it in front of you, which is probably what they'll do if they're
Mhm.
telling you the story in person. So I think that's a
Absolutely.
brilliant thing for you to
And
ask them
and
to do.
and it'll also narrow the kind of questions I need to ask. So I
Yeah,
get the full story, and then I go, well, but you didn't tell me enough about this. So I can write back and say, just give me another couple paragraphs on that, or
perfect.
what really happened there. Tell me about that. And then people might write 10 pages. That isn't useful to me at all, but it's good that they wrote it down
Hmm.
in terms of their process. And when you talk
Hmm.
about dealing with emotions, it's a good way to get it all out and sort of get through the steps that you work through with with the same clients, but in a
Yeah,
different way.
yeah,
So, you're doing that with your clients. If they don't have the advantage of having Elizabeth available to them, they can do it themselves and go to their lawyer to assist them. You're a team. You're getting advice, but you're choosing which advice you want to take, and your lawyer's been through it. Like, if you have anyone who's been doing this for a while, they will tell you what to do and what not to do.
yeah,
What not to do is, it used to be he said, she said. Now it's he wrote, she wrote.
yeah,
So so I can tell you, as much as everything's now in writing, the last thing a judge wants to do is read 100 pages of printed out text.
yeah,
um, you pull out the important ones.
yeah,
I do have clients who cannot distinguish what is important and what is not, and has to send everything to me, and they got to pay us to do it. But if you want to save some money, you know what's bad.
yeah,
And remember, every time you're angry and ready to write that email or text back, remember, a judge could read it one day.
yeah.
And always have that in the back of your head, because you never want to you don't want to ever threaten, obviously. You never want to ever say that you're not going to see the kids, or that he's at this or that or the other, because even if he is, don't put it in writing, because a
No, and
judge,
I have clients who've made that mistake. And they use it.
they do.
Things get adversarial. You're not the only one who's angry here. This is the other thing too that I find so interesting sometimes. My clients never seem to consider, never, it's an exaggeration, but often don't seem to consider that their ex might be really angry at them, that he might be hurt, that this person might also feel really betrayed for a number of reasons. Emotions come from all kinds of places. And as much as we empower women, and no one's going to tell me how I feel, and don't devalue my emotions that I just shared with you, well, let's not devalue what the other person is saying that he or she is experiencing as well. So we got two of them, and everybody's just as entitled to feel it. And I think it's, yeah, there's so much that it actually blows up when no one is listening, and often the person who complains about not being heard is also the person who's not listening at
Right,
all.
right.
And
And
I'll often say to my clients, your ex, what their buttons are. And I don't believe in pushing them, by the way, not when you're going through a legal battle. Don't push them. So I'm like, just like you knew in your marriage how to work around them, how to keep him calm, how to make her feel better, whatever it was, you're going to use this knowledge and you're going to say the things that they need to hear so that they stay here and can make decisions that are better, you know, instead of fueling the fire by, but you did this or whatever, you know?
Right. It's interesting. I tell a lot of my clients that are in that kind of situation the exact same thing. You know how to manage. You know him better than I do. Like,
Exactly.
you know your spouse better. I don't know them. I didn't
Yeah.
marry them. I didn't choose them and have kids with them. And I don't know that the person. And it's likely they've always sort of been like this. You know, they didn't
Yeah.
wake up one day and be the ogre they became. Things took time to go through. So you know how, especially if you're having to deal with children together. So there's an ongoing relationship after the initial
Yeah.
settlement of the divorce, or you know, and the vast majority of people settle, literally 95% of people settle without a trial. They may start in court, etc., but it's very, very, very few. So only the most difficult cases will go to
Yeah.
court, or or ones where there's, it could be lawyers, it could be the issue. Sometimes there's real issues that the courts haven't dealt with yet. There's a real, how do we deal with that tax problem? Um, you'd hope that people would sit together and do it, but it could mean millions of dollars or thousands of dollars. So people are prepared to go and have the fight. But managing, you know, sometimes you get more with, you know, you get more with honey than with
You know,
vinegar.
I believe if I had known then what I know now, I believe I could have managed him well enough to avoid our trial. At the time, and I mean, I know you're hearing one side and it's so
Mhm.
easy for me to say this, but I can honestly say that the trial happened because he just refused to agree to any of the basic child support. Like it was just like the basic stuff, like this is the law, and it was just a refusal to kind of accept that that's the law, and but that's then the law is wrong.
Right.
That was
And
kind of the
what you're going to
mentality.
get, I mean, so that's that small percentage of
Yeah.
people that you cannot get through. And
No.
they do say that people, like there's about 10% of people who have some kind of personality disorder,
Yeah.
but we see a disproportionate number of those people. And the court really is set up to deal with the average case. You
I
make
know.
X dollars, you have 2 kids, you know, you have a little bit of a legal issue that needs to be resolved. You know, that's what they're not there to deal with these awful, high conflict, difficult cases of alienation.
But they're the ones that end up there.
That's who ends up there. And we try, and we have a bench that, you know, now in Toronto, and there's some courts that have just family lawyers. Toronto, we have family and other lawyers who deal with family cases. We try to get most of the people who have done family in the past as lawyers, then sit as family court judges. I mean, that seems ideal. People who did criminal should be doing murder trials as judges. People who did family should be doing family law cases
Yeah, I
as
didn't
the
even
judges.
realize that it was a luck of the draw until I went through it myself. So I can't remember how far ahead, like not very far ahead, we found out the name of the judge.
Right,
And I do remember my lawyer being quite pleased because I believe he was a family lawyer. So
right.
we were
That's what
dealing with
I thought.
someone who had a good grasp of that. But however, this was 15 years ago.
Right.
There was certainly not the same level of awareness of that imbalance and sensitivity to that. At the time, just by the wording that the judge used, there was no question that he saw
Yeah.
that he was being lied to, but he couldn't prove it any more than I could. Like it was one of those
Right.
scenarios like I have to go with
Yeah.
what's in front of me here, and with what's in front of me, this is what I'm ruling.
Yeah.
And
But the courts now, they get it. They've seen so many, the
yeah,
judges
I
have seen
think they've seen
so many
more.
cases, and if I ever see a payor, who has made more money post separation, I quit. Like it's almost never, ever, ever, ever happens.
Yeah.
All and it could be that people, they're going through a very difficult time, and if they, you know, used to do a lot of overtime and now have the kids part of the time themselves that they're responsible for, so they can't do the overtime, and you see their income post separation go down, and no one believes them. But if they're playing games, the court is much more attuned to and has better powers to get information. But in your case, I mean, if you have a spouse who you have children and says, I'm not going to pay support, I mean, then you're talking like it's nonsense. It's the judge is just going to go, what's your income? And then you start fighting about what the income is. But the fact is, as soon as you figure out the income,
Well,
a judge will order it.
yeah.
This,
So, and in my case, he decided to quit a very high paying job, took a job with his dad, and had him write a letter of like a proof of employment and income from his dad. And this was
yeah,
accepted because the lawyer said, I there is nothing else for me to show otherwise. And like I said, I remember he expressed disbelief that he would choose to leave a job here and take this, but there was nothing, his hands were kind of tied. And I don't know if that would have been any different now. And, for people have asked me, like, was it worth going to trial? No, it wasn't. The money that both of us spent. And as much as what I did get was I finally got like my half of a property. I finally had some medical expenses reimbursed to me. And I finally got the support agreement. That's it. Right. So there was some back pay that I also got and
right,
stuff like that. So I mean, but there was nothing beyond what the law was going to give me anyway. There
right.
wasn't some big windfall like, oh yeah, when my lawyer, my judge was so in favor of me, gave me this and this, and that did not happen. There was no sense of, the courts favor the women. There was none of that.
No,
It was he dealt with what was in front of him. He took care of it, and that was it.
yeah. Today, we see judges imputing the courts have power to impute income. So
Yeah,
if
he
you
did then too, and he
voluntarily,
didn't do it.
yeah, the courts have the ability if you voluntarily leave a job that is totally available to you to do something at a much lower paying, whether and with family, I mean that just screams out
Yeah,
like just a made up thing.
yeah.
And did he stay with his family
For a
job
year,
and then went back to something?
not to quite that level, but made a lot more money. Yes.
And did you go after him for
No.
the increase? No, okay.
And I will tell you, I had friends and people around me who cared about me, and literally, like every 6 months, my best friend would call me and say, "Elizabeth, you got to do something about this." And I couldn't go through the process again. It had been horrific. Those 3 days in court, like in trial, it was awful, and the whole experience was awful. At this point, my kids were, between 13 and 20.
That's you. Yeah.
I just they were already so marked by the conflict between us, and to then go to them and say, yeah, so I'm going to go back to court now. I'm going to take your dad back to court to get some more money off him. There was nothing about that felt right. It's just kind of made me more determined to succeed on my own and to
Right.
find my own way to supplement that. And that's what I did. I just never wanted to go back to that. It was an awful journey. Like there was nothing about it that was good.
Yeah, the litigation fatigue, we call it. Like it's really
Yeah.
and our legislation, our child support legislation, child support specifically says that annually you're adjusting the support based on income. And that's what the legislation says.
They
And
don't follow up though.
almost no one comes back. We thought in 1997, when the guidelines came out, we thought there'd be a floodgates. We had to put in systems in the court. We thought every year all these people will start coming back. If you've been there once, no one was coming back. That
No.
people, I mean, obviously, if it's in your agreement that you exchange income tax returns each year and then adjust each year, that's the typical arrangement. But even when that happens, people don't do it. They throw that agreement in the drawer. They don't want to deal with it again, and they're in a bit of denial because they can't. It's too stressful.
Yeah, no,
To
and that was me. I could have gone back many times.
You
I
can
just
actually still go back. The Supreme Court of Canada says even when the kids are just in the last couple of years in a case I was involved in, even after the kids are done, you can go back and recover what he should have paid because child support is the right of the child. So it's independent of either parent. It's the right of the child. So, for example, I have a case now where a guy was separated. He has 3 kids. He does very, very well, but he was preyed upon by a person who knew how much money he had. It happens a lot with professional athletes, and they have a 1 night or 2 night stand, and with
Now this
pregnancy,
child.
and they have this child, and it's a bit of a payday. And I always get mad at these guys.
Wear a
Um,
condom, right?
yes, although but I was watching a show the other day, and there was a big fight between these people because the man took off the condom, and the woman took it, and the woman wanted the condom, and the guy said, "I'm not giving it to you." Like after they were finished, "I'm not giving it to you," because he knew that his semen was still in the condom,
Oh
and
my God, she was going to use it.
he goes, "I'm not giving it to you." And it was very funny because my husband said, because he was watching, he goes, "Oh my God, that never, it wouldn't have even come into my mind because I've told him that these things happen." And he goes, "I just thought that that was not a thing,
That's
but kind
insane.
of on
That's so
TV."
deceitful. So
It was
deceitful.
totally, and but that the child gets born, and the court will always, at least in Ontario, Canadian courts, will always say that however that child emerged, maybe if you can really prove deception, but people have tried. People have really tried that.
Well, the reality is that that child is still entitled to support, and by both parents, and both parents
Yes,
consensually entered into that union,
right,
not with the intent of having a child, but this, like, where would you draw the line? Because
right,
maybe a condom breaks,
right,
so where do you
exactly,
draw the line?
exactly. Where, and maybe not, no one wanted, but a gentleman did in those similar kind of circumstances say, she deceived me. She told me she was on birth control. It was an issue. I told her I didn't want children. This was part of our arrangement that she would use birth control and I would use birth, whatever. And this child emerged, and he tried every which way to get compensated for the deception. It was truly a deception. But the court went, the baby's here. The court has an obligation to protect
To protect the
children,
child, yeah.
disabled people, and people who can't take care of themselves,
Yeah,
like children. So they will always intervene
yeah,
for
yeah.
the child.
No, it's there's no question that the family court system, as any court system, gets abused by people who know how to do that. And it's unfortunately always the ones who don't have good intentions who
Mm,
misuse the system. And it does seem like it's too easy for them to do that. There's not enough stoppers in place.
mm,
I have an acquaintance who I actually interviewed for the podcast a few weeks ago, and she had a horrible case in Ottawa, and her personal case. And one of the big checkpoints was just where the system failed, both of them really, because of everything that went down, was this constant acceptance of delays. So, there's a trial, a pre-trial date, a trial conference set, and you're supposed to have ABC documents in order before you attend, and then the judge looks at this and could potentially make a ruling. But one party shows up without said documents or hasn't prepared, and the judge goes, "Okay, I'll give you a 30-day continuance or delay or whatever." And so then we do this again. Well, that keeps happening. There seems to be no time where a judge will say, "Well, too bad, so sad, you have lots of opportunity. We're going to go with whatever documents and numbers she's given us or this person's given
mm.
us, and you're just going to have to abide by that because of the only numbers we have, and we're done waiting." And I believe that that's one of the little things that the court system can do to prevent this abuse of the system. Because bring in your financial disclosure, and if you won't bring it in, we're going to take hers as, or his, whatever, like the other persons who prepared it, we're going to take them at their word, and we're going to proceed with those numbers. I think if that happened, you'd see people comply big time.
Well, they're really trying. So because there's always a balance, because some people sort of just can't get their act together. Some people are intentionally not providing, and some people are just, they can't. They just, for whatever reasons, they may be having emotional problems and they can't collect all the things that they need to collect, or they just can't. So that's when they need someone to help them, whether it's a lawyer or otherwise.
Yeah.
But now, when you start a court proceeding in Ontario, I believe it's throughout Ontario, but certainly in the Toronto court and the courts around Toronto, you can get what's called an automatic order. And an order is issued on the day that you issue your application, that you have 30 days to provide your financial statement, your income tax return, your basic.
But what happens if you don't?
If you don't, then there'll be costs against you at the first appearance, or maybe you won't be able to have the first appearance right away, or the first appearance, the first step being the
But
case.
will there be costs against you, or could there be costs?
There could be.
Yeah.
Right. But the judges are ordering costs more and more.
Okay.
Part of the difficulty is people come and, one side says, she didn't do this, she didn't do this, she didn't do this. And then he says, yeah, but I just got it, or I just changed lawyers. There's always some reason.
But there comes a point where one just has to say,
I get that. Yeah. And they will get to that point. But even if it takes too long, because our Court of Appeal, like the lower courts will say, we're going to what we call strike your pleadings, which means you're out of this case, and we're going to rely on just the other side because you did not do what you were supposed to do, so you don't even have an opportunity to present your case. And I think that's what you were getting at. Mm-hmm. To get to that point, you sometimes have to go to court for 10 times, and then the court makes the order, and then the Court of Appeal will say, you can't, that's not fair. You should that's not.
But this is how the abuse happens, though, and
yes.
And that is abuse that's facilitated by the courts. The courts are sitting there and complying with the abuser and not with the person that's being abused.
Right.
And I think that that's one of the areas where there just needs to be a fairly drastic change.
Right.
In a perfect scenario, in my opinion, it's. You enter the court system to resolve a particular dispute, like you said earlier on. Something, everything else has been settled, but there's this thing that just they can't agree on, or they need some help with. And so you go and take care of that. All documents must be ready by this date. If they're not ready by this date, then the ruling will be made on what is presented, and that's just the way it is. I think that would eliminate so many. Because, and then there's all the pre-trial conferences. My God, I couldn't tell you how many I went to, and I couldn't tell you how many times my lawyer said 95% of all cases get settled.
Right.
No, not me. But and my ex tried all of those too. He was like, "Oh, my accountant has cancer," and and it's like,
or the lawyers having a baby, or the
yeah. There was all kinds. So my lawyer was very like, okay, but does your accountant not have anyone holding the business? Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we're trying to get that. It's like, oh, come on. I knew this accountant. He, the accountant, when we separated, decided he could only go with one of us, and he went with him. But I mean, I know what he was like. He was our accountant for 10 years. This was not a man who would have left my ex hanging. It was just an excuse. But
of course, there's always going to be an excuse. There's always going to be something.
But that's what needs to be nipped. Like, it's just that loophole, that opportunity to go, sorry, I'm not ready, needs to go away. But I think we should probably wrap up our conversation today. We've talked about so many important things, and I know that my ladies will really, really value your incredible advice. Is there something that, before we finish today, anything you want to leave them with, like just something for my ladies, like advice or a tip?
This too will pass. I have found that in almost every single circumstance, when I meet people 2 years later, 3 years later, they always say, you told me it would get better, and it did.
Yes.
And it will, you will get past this. You will recover, and you will sometimes actually have an okay relationship with your ex. It does come back around, and the sooner both of you can, and in those circumstances where it can happen, there's lots of circumstances where it can't, it'll be so much better for the kids.
Absolutely.
You don't have to be best friends. You don't even have to be friends. You just have to work together.
Be civil.
And be civil.
Yeah.
Say hello, goodbye. That's it. You don't have to be best friends to make the kids happy. Just be nice to them. And they should be nice to you back, to your spouse, and your kids will see that, and they'll feel more comfortable.
Oh, it makes all the difference.
All the difference in the world. And sometimes you got to bite your tongue. Sometimes you really got to bite your tongue, but it'll help you in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheryl, thank you so much for your time today. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I feel like we should definitely have you back. There's going to be so many more questions that I'll want to ask you, but I love the work you're doing. And I think working with someone like yourself who's had so much experience, is so beneficial to people going in, and I love everything you've said, but especially, making sure that you're connecting with the right lawyer, the person who's right for you. So whether you are in, I know you guys can only work in certain areas, and yours is obviously Ontario, but no matter what, the advice that you've given here today is general and applies to anyone almost anywhere. So I really appreciate your time, and I will be including her contact information in the show notes below. So thank you again, Cheryl. And
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It was wonderful speaking to you, and I'm happy to do so again in the future if you want.
I would love that. Okay, thank you.